The alarm screamed through the corridors of the orbital station, red lights pulsing in rhythm with David Chen's heartbeat. He moved through the narrow passage with practiced efficiency, his boots magnetized to the floor as the artificial gravity flickered. Behind him, the station groaned, metal twisting under forces it was never designed to handle. The Kreshva had arrived 3 hours ahead of schedule, and their weapons were already tearing through the outer sections. David reached the emergency command center and palmed the access panel. The door hissed open, revealing a space barely large enough for 2 people. Inside, hunched over a holographic display, was the reason he'd made this suicidal run through a dying station. Commander Vela straightened, her 4 eyes widening as she saw him. Her species, the Thessari, were known throughout the galaxy as the greatest strategists and warriors. They were also known for their ability to sense fear in other beings, an evolutionary trait that made them exceptional hunters and negotiators. "You should not have come back," Vela said, her translator device rendering her clicking speech into flat, emotionless words. But David had spent enough time with her to read the subtle color shifts in her scaled skin. She was afraid, deeply, genuinely terrified. "The evac ships left 20 minutes ago. You could have been safe." "Yeah, well, I had a feeling you might need a ride," David replied, checking the charge on his weapon. The small plasma pistol was hardly military grade, but it was better than nothing. "Your escape pod was damaged in the first attack. I saw it on the monitors." Vela's secondary arms twitched, a gesture he'd learned meant surprise. "You risked your life because of a damaged escape pod?" "I risked my life because you're still here," David corrected, moving to the display. The hologram showed the station's layout in painful detail. Red sections indicated hull breaches. Yellow showed areas with life support failure. There wasn't much blue left. "What's our situation?" "Fatal," Vela said simply. She manipulated the display with her primary hands, while her secondary arms worked a separate console. "The Kreshva are not interested in capturing the station. They are systematically destroying it, section by section. They know I am here. They know what data I carry." She touched a small drive attached to her equipment harness. "This information could change the course of the war. It must reach Alliance Command." David studied the map. The station was a wheel design, 3 spokes connecting to a central hub. They were in Spoke 2, near the outer rim. The only functioning hangar was in Spoke 3, and between them was nearly a kilometer of corridor, 3 airlocks, and at least 2 sections that were already partially exposed to vacuum. "We can make it," he said. Vela's skin shifted to a darker blue, a color he associated with skepticism. "The probability of success is less than 8%. The Kreshva have already boarded the station. They will be hunting for me specifically. You would be wise to leave me and save yourself. Take the data, get it to command." "Not happening," David said, checking his suit seals. "Besides, 8% is pretty good odds." 8% is almost certain death. Almost isn't the same as definitely. David pulled his helmet on and locked it into place. The suit's systems hummed to life, displaying atmospheric readings and structural integrity warnings. None of them were good. "Come on, we're wasting time." Vela stared at him for a long moment, her 4 eyes unblinking. "I do not understand your species," she finally said, but she secured her own equipment and moved toward the door. "Your fear response appears to be malfunctioning." They moved quickly through the corridors, David leading with his pistol raised. The stations shuddered periodically as the Kreshva weapons punched through another section. Twice they had to detour around breaches, squeezing through maintenance tunnels barely wide enough for Vela's frame. The Thessari were larger than humans, nearly 7 feet tall with powerful digitigrade legs and 4 arms that could tear through steel. Despite their size, Vela moved with fluid grace, her evolutionary heritage as ambush predators evident in every motion. They were halfway through Spoke 2 when they encountered the first Kreshva. The creature rounded the corner ahead of them, its 6 legs carrying its segmented body at horrifying speed. It looked like someone had crossed a centipede with an armored tank and given it a face full of serrated mandibles. The Kreshva were one of the galaxy's most feared species, and for good reason. They felt no pain, showed no mercy, and fought with a biological imperative that made negotiation impossible. David fired 3 times. The plasma bolts splashed against the creature's carapace, scorching but not penetrating. The Kreshva shrieked, a sound that bypassed his translator and went straight to the primal parts of his brain that remembered what it meant to be prey. It charged. Vila moved faster than David's eyes could follow. She dropped low, her powerful legs coiling and then releasing like springs. She met the Kreshva's charge with all 4 arms extended, catching it under its front segments and using its own momentum to flip it over her head. The creature crashed into the wall behind them, and David didn't waste the opportunity. He aimed for the softer joints where the segments connected and fired. This time the plasma found purchase. The Kreshva spasmed and went still. "Move," Vila commanded, already running. "Where there is one, there are always more." She was right. They heard the clicking of multiple Kreshva in the corridors behind them, the sound echoing and multiplying until it seemed like the walls themselves were alive with alien hunters. David and Vela ran, the humans' shorter legs struggling to match the Thessari's loping stride. They reached the first airlock just as 3 more Kreshva appeared at the far end of the corridor. David slammed his hand on the control panel while Vela turned to face their pursuers. The airlock door began its agonizingly slow descent. The Kreshva charged. Vela's skin flashed bright orange, a warning coloration that meant she was preparing to fight. Her species might be strategic thinkers, but they were also capable of terrifying violence when cornered. The first Kreshva reached them just as the door was halfway down. Vela caught it with her upper arms, her lower arms already reaching for its legs. She ripped the creature literally in half, its body separating with a sound like tearing metal. The second Kreshva leaped over its dying companion, mandibles spread wide. David fired, walking his shots up the creature's underbelly until it collapsed, sliding forward on its own momentum to crash against Vela's legs. The third Kreshva was smarter. It scuttled up the wall, its adhesive feet finding purchase on the smooth metal as it attempted to come at them from above. David tracked it with his pistol, but before he could fire, the airlock door completed its cycle. The heavy barrier slammed down, catching the Kreshva's rear segments and severing them. The front half of the creature fell, still very much alive and very angry. Vela stomped on it with one powerful leg, the force of the blow cracking the corridor's floor plating. The Kreshva stopped moving. "Through," she said, already working the inner door's controls. Quickly, the airlock cycled, and they emerged into a section that was somehow worse than the one they'd left. The corridor here was tilted at a 15-degree angle, the structural supports twisted and groaning. Sparks rained from severed power conduits, and the air tasted of ozone and burning plastic, even through David's suit filters. They could see the next airlock 100 meters ahead, but the path was treacherous. Panels had fallen from the ceiling, creating an obstacle course of sharp metal edges and exposed wiring. They were 3/4 of the way across when the corridor decided it had had enough. With a sound like a gunshot, one of the main support beams snapped. The floor dropped 1/2 meter, then canted another 10 degrees. David lost his footing, sliding toward a jagged hole in the outer wall. Beyond it, he could see stars and the curve of the planet below, and no air. His slide accelerated. Vila's hand closed around his arm with crushing force. She'd anchored herself by jamming her other arms into a gap where a floor panel had torn away. Her legs braced against a support beam. She hauled David back from the edge, pulling him up to more stable footing with casual strength that reminded him just how different their species were. "Thank you," David gasped, his heart hammering. "Thank me when we are safe," Vila replied, but her skin had shifted to a warmer color that he'd learned meant satisfaction or pleasure. She'd saved his life, and despite the dire circumstances, She was pleased about it. Come, we are close now. They made it through the second airlock without encountering more Kreshva, but David knew their luck couldn't hold. The enemy would be converging on the hangar, knowing that was the only escape route. He was proven right when they reached the final stretch. The corridor leading to the hangar was long and straight, with no cover and no alternate routes. And at the far end, silhouetted against the hangar's lights, were at least a dozen Kreshva. They'd set up a perfect kill zone, their bodies blocking the entire width of the corridor, mandibles clicking in anticipation. David and Vila stopped at the corridor's entrance, taking cover behind what remained of a bulkhead. Through the gap, they could see one small ship in the hangar, a single-pilot scout vessel that could maybe, possibly, hold two beings if one of them didn't mind being very uncomfortable. "This is where we part ways," Vela said quietly. Her skin had gone pale, almost white, a color David had never seen before. "I will create a distraction. You will run for the ship, take the data, complete the mission." "What? No," David said. "We go together or not at all." "Do not be foolish. Look at them." Vela gestured toward the Kreshva. "I cannot fight so many, but I can fight long enough for you to reach the ship. It is the only logical choice." "Logic can go to hell," David said. He was checking his pistol's charge, his mind racing through possibilities. "There's always another way." "Not this time, human." Vela placed one of her hands on his shoulder, a gesture of affection rare for her species. "You have been a worthy companion. I am glad I met you. Go, now." "No." The word hung between them. Vela's four eyes studied him intently, and David could feel her analyzing him, trying to understand what defect in his brain was preventing him from accepting the obvious. The Thessari were pragmatic to their core, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a death world where only the clever and ruthless survived. Sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. But humans were different. Humans were weird. "I don't understand," Vela said slowly. "Why are you not afraid? I can sense fear in nearly every species. It radiates from them like heat. But you..." She leaned closer, her eyes studying him with scientific curiosity. "Even now, with death certain, you show none. Your heartbeat is elevated, your breathing increased, but there is no fear. Why? What is wrong with you?" David looked at the Kreshva, then at the ship beyond them. He thought about the question, really thought about it. Why wasn't he afraid? He should be. Any sane person would be terrified. But instead, all he felt was a strange calm, a clarity that came from standing at the edge of the abyss and choosing not to blink. "You want to know why I'm not afraid?" David asked, and something in his voice made Vela's skin shift to a color he'd definitely never seen before. Something between purple and black. "Because I'm human. And the thing about humans is, we've been the scared ones for most of our history." He turned to look at her fully, his eyes visible through his helmet's faceplate. "We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us every single day. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the fastest. We didn't have claws or fangs or armor. We were weak, slow, fragile things that should have gone extinct a million times over. But we didn't. You know why?" Vela didn't answer, transfixed by the intensity in his gaze. "Because we learned that fear isn't something you run from. It's something you run toward. Every predator that hunted us, every disease that tried to wipe us out, every natural disaster that should have ended us, we looked at it and said, 'Not today.' We're not fearless, Vela. We're absolutely terrified, all the time. We're just too stubborn to let that stop us." The clicking of the Kreshva grew louder, more agitated. They knew their prey was close. David could see them shifting, preparing to charge if their targets tried to run. He checked his pistol one more time, still low on charge, enough for maybe 20 shots, against 12 armored killing machines. The math didn't work. But then again, the math had never worked for humanity, and they were still here. "I'm going to tell you something that might not translate well," David continued, his voice steady. "But I'm going to try anyway. There's a phrase we have on Earth, hold my beer. It's what we say right before we do something incredibly stupid and dangerous. And the reason we say it, the reason it's funny to us, is because it implies we're going to survive. We're going to do this impossible thing, and then we're going to come back and finish our drink. That's human optimism in 4 words. That's our entire species in a nutshell." "That is insane," Vila said, but her skin was brightening, shifting through colors that suggested confusion mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps just the recognition of meeting someone truly alien to her way of thinking. "Completely," David agreed. "Now hold my beer. I've got an idea." He didn't actually have beer, of course. What he had was a damaged orbital station that was minutes from complete structural failure, a pistol with limited charge, and a desperate need to keep someone he cared about alive. He also had something else, something that Vila's pragmatic species might never fully understand. He had the stubborn, irrational, absolutely human refusal to accept the inevitable. David accessed his suit's controls, pulling up the station's systems. Most were offline or failing, but environmental controls still had partial function. He traced the power grid, following the connections until he found what he needed. The section they were in shared a power junction with the hangar, and that junction included the magnetic containment for the station's fuel storage. "What are you doing?" Vila asked, watching his fingers fly across the interface. "Something stupid," David replied. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't slow down, just get to that ship and start the launch sequence. I'll be right behind you." "That is not a plan. That is suicide with extra steps." "Trust me," David said, and he actually smiled. In the face of certain death, surrounded by hostile aliens on a dying station, he smiled. "I've done stupider things and survived. There was this one time in basic training with a loading mech and a gravity well that I really shouldn't tell you about." Before Vila could respond, David executed his hastily conceived plan. He overrode the safety protocols on the power junction, routing all available power through the conduits that ran along the ceiling of the corridor. Then he triggered the emergency purge on the fuel containment. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Kreshva began to advance, sensing their moment. Then the corridor exploded into light and fire. The fuel didn't actually explode. That would have killed them all. Instead, it flashed into superheated plasma, contained by the magnetic fields for just long enough to surge through the power conduits like blood through veins. The ceiling erupted with electric fire, arcs of energy jumping and dancing like living things. The Kreshva shrieked as the discharge washed over them, their conductive carapaces turning them into biological lightning rods. They spasmed and scattered, their formation breaking as they tried to escape the killing current. "Run!" David shouted, and he suited action to words, sprinting down the corridor with Vela a step behind him. The Kreshva were tough, but they weren't invincible. Several lay still, their bodies smoking. Others were disoriented, clicking in confusion as their sensory organs recovered from the overload. David and Vela wove between them, the human firing his pistol at any that moved to intercept, while the Thessari simply bowled through, her greater mass and strength making her an unstoppable force. A Kreshva recovered faster than the others and lunged at David from the side. He didn't have time to dodge. The mandibles were inches from his helmet when Vela's lower arm caught the creature and hurled it into the wall with enough force to crack both the alien's carapace and the station's bulkhead. She didn't even slow down, grabbing David's arm and practically dragging him the last 20 meters to the hangar. They burst through the doors and into the open space. The scout ship sat on its landing pad, small and angular and beautiful. Alarms were blaring, warning of imminent structural failure. The station had minutes left, maybe less. David could hear the Kreshva behind them, recovering, pursuing. They reached the ship, and Vela palmed the entry panel. The hatch hissed open. "Get in!" David shouted, turning to cover their retreat. 3 Kreshva had made it through the corridor, moving fast despite their injuries. He fired, placing his shots carefully. 1 went down, 2 kept coming. His pistol's charge indicator flashed red. Empty. David threw the useless weapon at the nearest Kreshva and pulled out the only other thing he had, a maintenance multi-tool that was absolutely not designed for combat. The Kreshva didn't care. They charged. He braced himself, knowing this was going to hurt and probably be the last thing he ever did. He thought about his family back on Earth, about his sister who told him he was crazy for joining the Deep Space Service, about his dad who said he was proud of him anyway. He thought it was a pretty good last thought to have. The Kreshva leaped. David raised the multi-tool, fully aware of how ridiculous he must look. Then something massive and angry intercepted the alien in midair. Vela had come back. She'd reached safety and come back, catching the Kreshva with all 4 arms and tearing it apart with a violence that was breathtaking to witness. The second Kreshva tried to flank her. David kicked it, which did exactly nothing to its armored body, but did distract it long enough for Vela to finish with the first and turn her attention to the second. She made it look easy. It wasn't. David could see the strain in her movements, the way her skin flashed through colors too quickly, stress and pain and determination all bleeding through her usually controlled exterior. But she fought like her ancestors had fought, like every Thesari that had ever lived had fought, with skill and fury and the absolute conviction that she would not die here. Not today. Not like this. The second Kreshva fell. Vela grabbed David again, and they ran for the ship. More Kreshva were entering the hangar. Too many to count. Too many to fight. They reached the hatch and tumbled inside, Vela slamming the control to seal it behind them. David rolled to his feet and made for the cockpit, while Vela secured the data drive and strapped into the co-pilot seat. The ship's systems came online, panels lighting up with status displays. David's hands moved across the controls, starting the launch sequence. Outside, the Kreshva swarmed the ship, their mandibles scoring the hull, looking for a way in. Come on, David muttered, watching the power-up sequence crawl forward. The engines needed another 30 seconds. They didn't have 30 seconds. The station shuddered violently, a sound like the universe screaming. Through the canopy, David could see the hangar's outer doors beginning to buckle, the frame twisting. When those doors went, everything in the hangar would be sucked into space, including them if they didn't get the engines online. 20 seconds, Vela said, her voice tight. She was watching the structural integrity readings. The doors will fail in 15. I know, David said. His hands continued their work, rerouting power, bypassing safeties, doing everything he could to shave seconds off the launch sequence. I know. 10 seconds to engine start, 12 seconds to door failure. I can do math, thank you, David said, but there was no heat in it. He was too focused. The entire universe had narrowed to the controls under his hands, and the numbers counting down on the display. Outside, a Kreshva found purchase on the canopy, its mandibles hammering against the reinforced material. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. 5 seconds to engine start, 7 seconds to door failure. The Kreshva punched through the canopy. Its mandibles reached into the cockpit, grasping blindly. Vela grabbed them with her upper arms, holding the creature back by main force while David finished the sequence. 3 seconds, 4 seconds to door failure. The engines roared to life. David's hands flew across the controls, disengaging the docking clamps, routing power to thrusters. The ship lurched upward. The Kreshva on the canopy fell away, losing its grip. The ones on the hull scattered as the thrust wash burned them. The ship rotated, nose turning toward the hangar doors. 2 seconds to door failure. Hold on, David shouted, and he punched the throttle to maximum. The scout ship shot forward like a bullet from a gun, crossing the hangar in a heartbeat. The doors were already buckling, the seal breaking. Atmosphere screamed past them, creating a vortex of debris and unfortunate Kreshva. David aimed for the rapidly widening gap and prayed to any deity that might be listening that the ship was small enough to fit through. They made it. Barely. The ship's shields sparked as they scraped through the twisted metal of the doorframe. But then they were out, flying free into open space. Behind them, the station completed its death throes. The hangar doors exploded outward, followed by a chain reaction of failures that rippled through the entire structure. The station tore itself apart, sections spinning away into the void, consumed by secondary explosions and the unforgiving math of catastrophic structural failure. David didn't watch. He was too busy flying, putting distance between them and the destruction, his hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Beside him, Vela slowly relaxed her grip on the co-pilot console, her skin gradually returning to something approaching her normal color. They flew in silence for several minutes, the only sound the hum of the engines and their own breathing. That, Vela finally said, was the single most irrational, illogical, statistically improbable sequence of events I have ever experienced. Yeah, David agreed, a grin spreading across his face. Pretty cool, right? Vela turned all four of her eyes on him, and her skin cycled through at least 6 different colors before settling on a deep amber that he thought might be the Thesari equivalent of exasperated affection. Cool, yes, that is certainly one word for it. She was quiet for a moment, then added more softly, "You saved my life, multiple times, when the logical action would have been to save yourself." "You saved mine too," David pointed out. He was running diagnostics on the ship, making sure they hadn't taken any critical damage during their desperate escape. Everything looked surprisingly intact. The scout ship was built tough, designed for exactly these kinds of emergency situations. Besides, I told you, that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind. "But why?" Vela pressed. "I have been analyzing your species since we began working together. I have read your history, studied your psychology. By all accounts, humans should be a minor species, barely capable of space travel. Your world is a death trap. Your bodies are fragile. You have no natural weapons. Yet you spread across the stars like a virus, establishing colonies in places where no sane species would dare to venture. You fight wars against enemies that should crush you, and somehow you win. You face impossible odds and call them challenges. And now you tell me you do all of this while afraid?" David thought about that while he plotted their course back to Alliance space. The nearest friendly outpost was 6 hours away, but they had enough fuel, and the Kreshva didn't seem to be pursuing. They'd made it. Against all odds, against logic and reason, they'd actually made it. "Fear is information," David said eventually. "It tells you that something is dangerous, that you should be careful. But it's not a command. It's not something that controls us. Every human feels fear, every single one. But we learned a long time ago that feeling afraid and being defeated by that fear are two completely different things." He glanced at her, seeing the way her eyes tracked his every movement, analyzing, trying to understand. "Your species evolved to be the apex predator on your world, right? You hunt by sensing fear in others. That's your advantage." "Yes," Vela confirmed. "Fear is honest. It cannot be hidden, not from us. We sense the chemical changes, the biological responses. It makes us exceptional at identifying threats and tracking prey. It also makes us excellent at avoiding danger ourselves. Fear is survival. For us, it's the opposite," David said. "We evolved as prey animals. We were the ones being hunted, being eaten, being picked off by bigger, stronger, faster predators. Fear was just the background noise of existence. If we'd let it stop us, we'd have gone extinct. So instead, we learned to function in spite of it. We learned to make plans while terrified. We learned to fight back against things that wanted to eat us. We learned to use our fear as fuel instead of letting it paralyze us." He pulled up a star chart, double-checking their trajectory. They were on course, safe for the moment. He could finally let himself relax, just a little. There's a story from Earth, he continued. An old story, maybe not even true, but it says something about humans. There was a man named Edmund Hillary who climbed the tallest mountain on our planet, a mountain called Everest. When asked why he did it, why he risked his life to climb something that had killed so many others, you know what he said? Vila shook her head, all four eyes fixed on him. What did he say? Because it's there. David smiled at the memory. That's the most human answer possible. We do dangerous, terrifying, impossible things for no other reason than because they exist. Because we can. Because someone said we couldn't. Your species sees a dangerous situation and makes the logical choice to avoid it. Humans see the same situation and think, but what if we didn't avoid it? What if we went through it instead? What if we won? Vila's skin shifted to a contemplative blue-green. That is a form of collective insanity. Probably, David agreed cheerfully, but it's our insanity, and it's gotten us this far. Do you know how many times Earth almost killed us? Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, asteroid impacts. Our own planet tried to wipe us out dozens of times. We survived anyway. We survived and we thrived and we spread and we kept going because stopping wasn't an option we were willing to accept. But you must feel the fear, Vila insisted. You said so yourself. I have analyzed your physiological responses. Your species produces adrenaline, cortisol, all the standard fear chemicals. Your heart rate increases, your breathing changes. You are not immune to fear. So how do you function through it? How do you remain rational when every instinct should be screaming at you to flee? David considered his answer carefully. This was important, he realized, not just for Vila's understanding of humans, but for her understanding of what they'd just been through together. We don't remain rational, he admitted. That's the secret. We're not thinking clearly when we do these things. We're not making logical decisions based on probability matrices and risk assessment. We're making emotional decisions. We're deciding that some things are worth the fear. Some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth saving, no matter what the odds say. He met her eyes, all four of them. I came back for you because you're my friend. Because the thought of you dying alone on that station while I escape was more terrifying than anything the Kreshva could do to me. That's not logic. That's not rational. That's just human. We're social creatures. We bond with others. We form connections that override our survival instincts. It's probably a design flaw in our evolution, honestly, but it's also what makes us who we are. Vela was silent for a long time. Her skin cycled through colors slowly, thoughtfully. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, softer somehow despite the mechanical translation. On my world, we have a concept. It does not translate well, but the closest approximation would be clutchmate. It refers to those who hatched alongside you, who shared your earliest moments of life. These individuals are valued above others, protected, honored. But the bond is biological, instinctive. You and I share no genetic connection. We are not even the same species. We met mere months ago, yet you treated me as your species treats their closest kin. Yeah, David said simply, that's pretty much it. Humans don't require genetic connection to form bonds. We just require time, shared experience, and a choice to care about someone. You worked with me, fought beside me, trusted me. That makes you important to me. Worth protecting, worth risking everything for. This is why your species is so successful, Vela said, and it sounded like a revelation. This is why you spread across the galaxy despite your physical limitations. You form alliances not out of strategic benefit, but out of genuine connection. You fight not just for yourself, but for others. You take irrational risks because you value something more than your own survival. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds almost noble, David joked, but Vela's skin flashed bright orange, the color of intense focus. It is terrifying, she said. Do you understand? From my perspective, from the perspective of most species in the galaxy, what you just described is horrifying. You will charge into certain death for someone you barely know. You will fight impossible battles for abstract concepts like honor or duty. You cannot be predicted because you do not behave according to logical self-interest. You are chaotic, irrational, and absolutely relentless. David blinked. Are you saying humans are the scary ones? Yes, Vela said immediately. Absolutely yes. The Kreshva are terrifying because they are predictable. They attack, they kill, they consume. They follow biological imperatives. They can be understood, anticipated, countered. But humans? Her skin darkened to almost black. Humans will smile at you while planning something insane. They will befriend you and then die for you without hesitation. They will lose a battle and call it a learning experience. They will stare at impossible odds and ask, but what if we win? They are afraid of everything, and somehow that makes them more dangerous, not less. David didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never thought of humanity as particularly frightening. They were just people, doing their best in a big, scary universe. But from Vela's perspective, shaped by millions of years of evolution as an apex predator who relied on fear as a tool, humans must seem completely alien, incomprehensible even. I'm sorry if we're scary, he offered lamely. It's not intentional. Vela's skin shifted to a warm amber, and her secondary arms made a gesture he'd learned meant amusement. Do not apologize. I did not say it was a bad thing, merely an observation. She paused, then added, when the Kreshva attacked, when I thought I would die on that station, I was afraid, deeply afraid. My every instinct told me to flee, to hide, to do anything to preserve my life. And then you appeared, having come back for me despite the danger, despite every logical reason to save yourself. And I realized something. What? That if the galaxy ever faces a threat too great to overcome, too dangerous to fight, too impossible to defeat, it will be humans who stand against it. Not because you are fearless, but because you are the only species insane enough to try anyway. The only species who looks at fear and says, so what? David felt something swell in his chest. Pride, maybe. Or just the recognition that despite everything, despite the differences between their species, they understood each other. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about humans, in a terrifying sort of way. It is meant as a compliment, Vela assured him. Among my people we have a saying, trust the hunter who knows fear, for they have survived what others have not. You humans know fear. You live with it constantly, yet you survived, thrived, conquered your world and reached for the stars. That is worthy of respect. It is also worthy of caution, but respect first. The ship flew on through the darkness, carrying its unlikely crew toward safety. David monitored their course while Vela secured the data that had cost so much to protect. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared danger and mutual trust. Outside the canopy, stars wheeled by, ancient and uncaring. The universe was vast and dangerous, and filled with things that could kill them in an instant. David knew that. He'd always known that. But he also knew something else, something that Vela was just beginning to understand. Fear was just information. What you did with that information, that was what defined you. And humans had spent their entire existence learning to do something with their fear other than run from it. 3 hours into their flight, the ship's proximity sensors chirped a warning. David checked the display, expecting to see debris from the destroyed station or maybe a passing asteroid. Instead, he saw 3 Kreshva fighters on an intercept course. They'd been waiting, lurking in the area, probably hoping for exactly this situation. Stragglers, survivors, easy pickings. We have company, David said, his voice calm despite the spike of adrenaline that hit his system. The scout ship wasn't armed for combat. It had shields, but they were designed for debris and radiation, not military-grade weapons. In a straight fight, they'd last maybe 30 seconds against 3 fighters. Vela checked her own display, her skin instantly shifting to combat colors. Can we outrun them? No, David said after checking their relative velocities. They're faster. They'll overtake us in 15 minutes. Can we fight them? Also no. We have no weapons and shields that couldn't stop a determined child with a slingshot, let alone HFY plasma cannons. Then we are dead, Vela stated. Not panicked, not upset, just accepting the mathematical reality of their situation. That was the Thessari way. Face the truth, no matter how unpleasant. Probably, David agreed, and then he smiled. That human smile, the one that Vela was learning meant something crazy was about to happen. But let's make them work for it. He adjusted their course, angling toward a nearby asteroid field. It wasn't much, just a scattered collection of rocks ranging from pebble-sized to house-sized. But it was something. It was terrain. It was variables. It was a chance, however small. The asteroid field? Vela's skin flickered with uncertainty. We are just as likely to collide with debris as they are. Perhaps more so, as they have combat training and we are flying a scout ship. Yep, David said cheerfully, pushing the throttle forward. The asteroids were 2 minutes away. The HFY fighters were 12 minutes behind and closing. But they're expecting us to do something logical. They're expecting us to run in a straight line, or try to surrender, or just give up. They're not expecting us to do something stupid. Because it is stupid, Vela pointed out, but she was already strapping herself in tighter, her hands moving to the co-pilot controls. Suicidally stupid. Only if we die, David countered. If we survive, it's called tactics. The asteroid field loomed ahead, rocks tumbling through space in chaotic orbits. The scout ship's collision avoidance system started screaming warnings, displaying dozens of potential impact vectors. David disabled it. The system was built to keep them safe, which meant avoiding risks. But avoiding risks meant maintaining a predictable flight path. And a predictable flight path meant death. They hit the field at full speed. David's hands danced across the controls, making constant micro-adjustments to their trajectory. A rock the size of a car tumbled past, missing their starboard side by meters. David rolled the ship, threaded between 2 larger asteroids, then dove under a third. Behind them, the HFY fighters entered the field. They were better pilots, better ships, better everything. But they were also cautious, slowing down to navigate the obstacles safely. David wasn't being safe. He was being reckless. He pushed the ship through gaps that were barely wide enough, pulled maneuvers that made the hull groan in protest, flew like someone who had nothing to lose because, honestly, he didn't. They were dead anyway if the HFY caught them. Might as well die doing something interesting. Contact in 30 seconds, Vela announced, watching the tactical display. They are gaining rapidly. I know, David said. A cluster of asteroids appeared ahead, rotating around a common center of gravity in a deadly ballet. There was a gap, a twisting path through the chaos that might just be wide enough. Might. David aimed for it. Hold on. The scout ship plunged into the cluster. Rocks filled the view screen, spinning, tumbling, colliding with each other in sprays of debris. David flew by instinct more than calculation, his brain processing the 3-dimensional puzzle faster than conscious thought. Left, right, up, roll, dive, climb. The ship shook as smaller rocks pinged off the shields. Alarms blared. Vela's skin cycled through colors so fast it was almost strobing. They emerged from the cluster intact, but barely. One of the HFY fighters wasn't so lucky. It had tried to follow them through the chaos and misjudged. Its wing clipped a rotating asteroid, sending it spinning into 2 more rocks. The fighter exploded in a brief, beautiful fireball that was immediately swallowed by the vacuum of space. 2 enemies left. David angled toward another dense region of the field, looking for any advantage. The HFY were being more careful now, hanging back, taking pot shots with their weapons when they had a clear line of sight. The scout ship's shields flared as plasma bolts connected, each hit draining their already limited power reserves. "Shields at 60%, Vila reported. "We cannot sustain much more damage." David saw it then. A massive asteroid, at least a kilometer across, with a deep crater on one side. And inside that crater, a forest of ice crystals that had formed from sublimating volatiles, creating a maze of spikes and needles. It was a death trap. It was perfect. "New plan," David said. "You remember that thing I said about humans doing stupid things?" "Vividly," Vila said, her skin now a color that he was pretty sure meant existential dread. "Well, it's about to get stupider." He aimed straight for the crater, accelerating instead of slowing down. The Kreshva fighters followed, sensing their prey was cornered. They spread out, flanking, preparing for the kill. David waited until the last possible second, until the crater's edge was filling the entire view screen, until Vila was making a sound that her translator couldn't even process. Then he dove. The scout ship plunged into the crater, into the forest of ice crystals. They were massive, some as tall as buildings, others thin as needles. David flew between them, around them, his hands moving faster than thought. The crystals shattered against the ship's shields, each impact weakening them further. Behind him, the two Kreshva fighters entered the crater. They were better pilots, they really were, but they were flying bigger, less maneuverable ships, and they were trying not to crash. David had long since abandoned such concerns. He pulled up hard, skimming along the crater wall, then rolled and dove back down through a gap between crystals that shouldn't have been navigable. The first Kreshva fighter tried to follow. It couldn't make the turn. It slammed into a crystal pillar, then another, then disintegrated in a cascade of impacts. One enemy left, but the last one was smart. It had pulled back, hovering at the crater's edge, waiting for David to emerge. There was no way out except up, and when they came up, they'd be a clear target. The Kreshva had all the time in the world to line up the perfect shot. "Options?" David asked, knowing there weren't any good ones. "We could wait," Vela suggested. "Perhaps it will get bored and leave." Kreshva don't get bored. They're biologically incapable of it. They wait for prey as long as it takes. "Then we could surrender?" "They don't take prisoners either. We charge out and die quickly, or we stay here and die slowly when our life support runs out. Those are our options." Vela was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There is a third option, a human option." David glanced at her. "Which is?" "We do something stupid." Her skin flashed with colors he'd never seen before, and her translator struggled with the emotional content. "You asked me earlier why I am not more afraid. The truth is, I am terrified. I have been terrified since the moment the Kreshva attacked the station. Every decision you have made should have killed us. Every risk you took should have been fatal. Yet we are still alive. Against all logic, against all probability, we survive." She turned all four eyes on him. "You said fear is information. Well, here is information. I am afraid. But I am also beginning to understand that fear and action are not opposites. They can coexist. You have been teaching me this through example." David felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride in her, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who'd looked at the darkness and decided to fight back. "So, what's your plan?" Vila pointed at the tactical display. "The fighter is hovering at the crater edge, waiting for us. It is in a stable position ready to intercept, but that also means it is stationary, not maneuvering." "A stationary target," David said, seeing where she was going. "We don't have weapons." "No," Vila agreed, "but we have a ship, and the ship has mass and momentum." David stared at her. "You want to ram them?" "It is illogical. It is irrational. It has a very low probability of success." Her skin settled into a solid, determined orange. "It is what a human would do." A laugh burst out of David, half manic, half delighted. "You've been paying attention." He pulled up the ship's systems, checking their structural integrity. They'd taken a beating, but the core frame was solid. The scout ship was built to survive impacts with small debris. A HFY fighter wasn't that much bigger. Probably. Okay, let's do this. But we need surprise. If they see us coming, they'll just dodge. I may be able to help with that, Vela said. She accessed the ship's communication system, pulling up frequencies. The HFY operate on a narrow band of radio spectrum. Their ships communicate constantly, coordinating attacks. If I broadcast on their frequency, create noise, it might disrupt their sensors temporarily. How temporarily? 3 seconds, maybe 4. Vela's hands were already moving, setting up the broadcast. After that, their systems will filter out the interference. But it may be enough. 4 seconds to get from here to there, impact, and pray we survive the collision. David did the math in his head. They'd need to come out of the crater at maximum thrust, dead on target. No room for error, no second chances. That's not a plan, that's a prayer with extra steps. Yes, Vela said simply. Do you have a better idea? David thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Nope, let's ram them. He positioned the ship at the bottom of the crater, angling toward the exit. The HFY fighter was up there somewhere, waiting, confident, probably planning what it would tell its clutch mates about the easy kills. On 3, 1, Vela activated the communications jamming. 2, David's hands tensed on the controls. 3, the scout ship shot upward like a missile, engines screaming at maximum power. They cleared the crater rim in under a second, and David's eyes immediately locked onto the HFY fighter. It was exactly where Vela predicted, hovering 200 meters away. The jamming was working. The fighter's sensors were clearly confused, the ship wobbling slightly as it tried to process conflicting information. Then the pilot saw them. Through the cockpit of the enemy ship, David could see the HFY's multiple eyes widening in what he imagined was surprise. The fighter started to move, started to evade. Too late. They were too close, moving too fast. The scout ship slammed into the fighter's port side with a sound like the universe breaking. Metal screamed. Systems exploded. The impact threw David against his restraints hard enough to crack ribs, and he heard Vela make a sound of pain beside him. But they were alive. The fighter was tumbling, its wings sheared off, its engines dead. It fell away, spinning toward the asteroid below. The scout ship wasn't doing much better. Alarms were screaming. Half the systems were offline. The canopy had new cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. David's hands moved on autopilot, trying to regain control, but the ship was barely responding. They were spinning too, tumbling through space, and he couldn't get the attitude thrusters to fire properly. Hull breach, Vela reported, her voice strained. One of her arms hung at an odd angle. Broken. Sealing sections. Life support is failing. David fought with the controls, finally managing to fire the main engine in short bursts. It wasn't elegant, but it arrested their spin. They weren't tumbling anymore. They were just drifting. In space. In a dying ship. He pulled up the diagnostic display and immediately wished he hadn't. It would have been faster to list what was still working. Can we make it to the outpost? He asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it said. No, Vela said. We have perhaps an hour of life support remaining. The outpost is 5 hours away, and our engines can only produce minimal thrust. We are not going to make it. David slumped back in his seat, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping him going drained away, leaving behind pain and weariness. They'd survived the station. They'd survived the HFY pursuit. They'd survived everything, only to die here, floating in the void. It seemed unfair, somehow, anticlimactic. Well, he said after a moment, at least we went out doing something awesome. Ramming an enemy fighter with an unarmed scout ship is not awesome, Vela said. It is insane. Same thing, from a certain perspective. David checked the data drive. still intact, still safe. The mission's complete at least. That data will reach command eventually. Someone will find our ship, recover the drive. It'll be worth it. That is very cold comfort when we are about to die, Vela pointed out. But her skin had shifted to a softer color, something that looked almost peaceful. However, you are correct. The mission is complete. We did what we set out to do. There is honor in that. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars drift by. David's ribs hurt where he'd hit the restraints. His left arm was throbbing. He was pretty sure he'd given himself a concussion, but he was weirdly okay with all of it. He'd done what he could. He'd saved Vela, protected the data, fought the good fight. If this was how it ended, he could accept that. David, Vela said softly, I have a question. Shoot. Are you afraid now? David considered it. Really, genuinely considered it. Was he afraid? He was about to die. He should be terrified. But instead, he just felt tired and maybe a little proud. No, he said honestly. I mean, I'm not happy about it. I had plans for next week. But afraid? Not really. More like disappointed? Is that weird? For my species, yes. For yours, I am beginning to understand it is normal. Vela adjusted her position, trying to ease the pain in her broken arm. You truly are remarkable, you humans. Individually irrational, but collectively unstoppable. I think I am beginning to see why the Alliance values your species so highly. You bring something to the galaxy that no other species can provide. What's that? Hope, Vela said simply. The irrational, illogical belief that things can get better. That impossible odds can be overcome. That death is just another problem to be solved. She paused, then added, It is infectious. I find myself hoping that we will survive this, despite all evidence to the contrary. That is your doing. Your human madness has infected my logical Thesari brain. David laughed, which hurt his ribs but felt good anyway. Sorry about that. The madness is highly contagious. Should have warned you. Too late now, Vela said, and if he didn't know better, he'd swear she was smiling. Her species didn't really smile, not in the human sense, but her skin was a warm, golden color that he'd learned meant contentment or happiness. If we must die, at least we die as friends. That is more than most warriors can claim. We're not dead yet, David said, and even as he said it, he was scanning the sensor display, looking for something. Anything. The sensors were barely functional, but they were picking up something. A faint signal, distant, but growing stronger. Vela, are you seeing this? She checked her own display, her 4 eyes widening. That is an Alliance signature. A patrol ship, I think. But they are too far away. They will not reach us in time. So we make the time, David said. He accessed the ship's emergency systems, pulling up every trick he knew. They had minimal power, but they had some. They had a damaged communications array, but it still worked. They had an hour of life support, but that was flexible if they were willing to get uncomfortable. We shut down everything non-essential. Heat, extra lights, all of it. We reroute power to the distress beacon and make it scream. And we wait. We will freeze, Vela said. The temperature will drop below safe levels within 30 minutes. But we won't suffocate, David countered. And cold I can handle. Earth gets cold. I'm from a place called Minnesota. I know cold. He was already shutting down systems, watching the power reserves slowly climb as he did. The cabin temperature immediately started dropping. The patrol ship will pick up the beacon. They'll come for us. We just have to survive long enough. Vela watched him work, her skin cycling through thoughtful colors. Then she started helping, using her good arms to access secondary systems and shut them down. Between them, they stripped the ship down to bare essentials: life support, minimal maneuvering, and the distress beacon. Everything else went dark and cold. The temperature dropped fast. Within 10 minutes, David could see his breath fogging inside his helmet. Within 20, he was shivering uncontrollably. The cold seeped through his suit, through his bones, settling deep in his core. Beside him, Vela was faring worse. Her species had evolved in a warm climate. They didn't handle cold well. Her movements were becoming sluggish, her skin dulling to a gray that suggested hypothermia. "Talk to me," David said through chattering teeth. "Stay awake. Tell me about your homeworld. I've never asked." Vela's response was slow, her translator struggling with her slurred speech. "Thessar, beautiful, warm, 3 suns. The sky is always purple at dawn." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I have a clutch sister, younger. She wants to be a pilot like me. I promised I would teach her." "You will," David said firmly. "We're going to make it. That patrol ship is getting closer. I can see it on sensors now." "You are lying to make me feel better," Vela said, but without heat. "Humans do that. They lie kindly. My sister does not know that yet. Someone should teach her. About humans, about their madness and their kindness." "You'll teach her yourself," David insisted. He was so cold now that he'd stopped shivering. That was bad. That was a sign of severe hypothermia. His body was giving up, shutting down. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. "Stay with me, Vela. Don't go to sleep." "So tired," Vela murmured. Her eyes were starting to close. "Cold. Very cold. I understand now why your species fears winter." "Stay awake," David shouted, or tried to. His voice came out as barely a whisper. He reached over with a hand he couldn't feel and shook her shoulder. "Vela, stay with me. That's an order. I didn't come all this way just to watch you die of cold. We're going to survive this. We're going to get rescued. You're going to see your sister again. You're going to teach her about crazy humans and our stupid plans. But you have to stay awake." Vela's eyes opened just slightly. "You are afraid now," she said, and even through the translator's flat affect, he could hear the satisfaction. "I can sense it. You are terrified. Of losing me. Of failing." "Yeah," David admitted. "I am. I'm scared out of my mind, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting. That's the human way. Feel the fear and do it anyway." He checked the sensors with eyes that were having trouble focusing. The patrol ship was closer. 10 minutes away maybe less. They just had to hold on a little longer. "Tell me more about your sister. What's her name?" "Sora," Vela said softly. "She is young, impulsive. She reminds me of you, always taking risks, always believing she can win. I worry about her." "She sounds great," David said. His own eyes were getting heavy. The cold was pulling him down into darkness, whispering promises of rest, of sleep, of an end to the struggle. It would be so easy to just let go. "I'd like to meet her someday. Maybe I could teach her some of our more useful human tricks, like how to hotwire a cargo loader, or how to cheat at poker." "You would corrupt her," Vela said, but there was warmth in her voice. Her skin flickered with color, fighting the gray. "She would like you. She would think you are brave." "Not brave," David corrected, his words slurring. "Just stubborn. There's a difference. Brave is doing something despite being afraid. Stubborn is being too stupid to quit." He laughed, which came out as more of a wheeze. "I'm very stupid." "No," Vela said. "You are brilliant, and kind, and irrational. And I am glad I met you, David Chen. I am glad we were friends." "Are friends," David corrected. "We're not dead yet. Don't use past tense." He forced his eyes to focus on the sensor display. The patrol ship was so close now. 5 minutes. Just 5 more minutes. "Almost there. Stay with me, please." The cabin was silent except for the sound of their breathing, ragged and slow. The temperature had dropped to levels that should have killed them already. David's suit was doing its best, but it wasn't designed for sustained exposure to hard vacuum temperatures. Neither of them should still be conscious. But they were. Because giving up wasn't an option. Because there was still a chance. Because hope, irrational as it was, refused to die. David felt himself slipping away. The edges of his vision were darkening. His thoughts were becoming fuzzy, disconnected. He tried to hold on, but the cold was too much. The exhaustion was too deep. He'd pushed his body beyond its limits, and now it was shutting down, whether he wanted it to or not. His last coherent thought was a hope that Vela would survive, that the patrol ship would get to her in time, that at least she would make it home. Then the darkness took him. David woke up warm. That was his first conscious thought. Warm, not cold, which meant either he was alive or heaven had surprisingly good climate control. He tried to open his eyes and immediately regretted it as bright light stabbed into his brain. He groaned, and immediately someone was beside him. A concerned voice speaking in rapid-fire Alliance Common. "Easy, easy. Don't try to move yet. You've been through significant trauma. Your core temperature dropped to dangerous levels. You're lucky to be alive." David forced his eyes open more carefully this time. He was in a medical bay, lying on a bed with various monitors attached to him. A Trellix medic stood over him, their tentacles making constant adjustments to the equipment. David's throat was dry, his body ached, but he was alive. Against all odds, he was actually alive. "Vela," he croaked. "Commander Vela, the Thessari, where is she?" The medic's color shifted to something that suggested relief. "She is alive, recovering in the next bay. Her injuries were more severe than yours. The cold affected her species more dramatically, but she will survive. You both will." David felt something unknot in his chest. They'd made it, both of them. The data, he said, the intelligence she was carrying. "Secured and already transmitted to Alliance Command," the medic assured him. "Your distress beacon led us straight to you. Though I must say, when we found your ship, we thought we were recovering bodies. No one should have survived in those conditions for as long as you did. Your life support was completely exhausted. Another 5 minutes in..." The medic trailed off, making a gesture David didn't recognize but understood anyway. "Another 5 minutes and they would have been dead." "But we didn't die," David said, a smile spreading across his face despite the pain. "We made it. We actually made it." "Against remarkable odds," the medic agreed. "The captain wants to speak with you both when you're recovered. I believe there will be commendations, though personally, I think there should also be psychological evaluations. The things you did, ramming an enemy fighter, shutting down life support to extend your survival time, it's all highly irregular. Some might even call it insane." "Yeah," David said, still smiling. "That sounds about right." The medic left to check on other patients, and David lay back, staring at the ceiling. They'd survived. Against the Kreshva, against the dying station, against the cold and the odds and everything the universe had thrown at them. It shouldn't have been possible. The mathematics said it was impossible. But they'd done it anyway, because that's what humans did. They looked at impossible and treated it like a suggestion. A few hours later, after the medics had cleared him for limited movement, David made his way to the next bay. Vela was awake, propped up in a bed similar to his. Her broken arm was in some kind of regenerative cast, and her skin was still paler than normal, but her eyes were alert, and all 4 of them tracked him as he entered. "You are supposed to be resting," she said, but there was no heat in it. Her skin shifted to warm colors as he approached. "Yeah, well, I wanted to make sure you were okay," David said, pulling up a chair. "Humans are terrible at following medical advice. It's kind of our thing." "I am beginning to understand that," Vela said. "The medics tell me we survived because you refused to accept death as a viable option, that you kept me conscious through sheer force of will and constant talking." "Someone had to," David said. "You were giving up there at the end. Using past tense, that's a violation of the human code. We don't use past tense until we're actually dead. Sometimes not even then, if the ghost stories are to be believed." Vela's skin rippled with colors that suggested amusement. I will remember that for next time. Let's try to avoid there being a next time, David suggested. I don't think my body can handle another near-death experience this week. I've hit my quota. Agreed. Vela was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I have been thinking about our conversation, about fear in humanity, about why you are the way you are. Come to any conclusions? Several, Vela said. First, that humans are clinically insane and should probably not be trusted with important missions. David laughed. Okay, fair. Second, that I am grateful for your insanity. It saved my life multiple times. It also showed me something important. She met his eyes with all four of hers. My species prides itself on logic, on rational decision-making, on using fear as a tool for survival. We are excellent at it. We have survived for millions of years being excellent at it. But we have also stagnated. We do not take risks. We do not push boundaries. We do not dream of impossible things because we are too busy calculating the probability of failure. She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly at the pain. Humans dream. You dream big, impossible dreams, and then you chase them despite every logical reason not to. You fail constantly, spectacularly, publicly, and then you get up and try again. You are individually weaker than most species, but collectively you are terrifying because you never, ever give up. You carry fear with you like a companion, acknowledge it, and then do what needs to be done anyway. That's a pretty generous interpretation of us being reckless idiots, David said, but he was smiling. Perhaps, Vela agreed, but your reckless idiocy has earned you a place in the galaxy that species twice your age have not achieved. You are respected, feared, and valued, because when the impossible needs to be done, everyone knows you will at least try, even if trying is suicide. David thought about that, about humanity's place in the galaxy, carved out through sheer stubbornness and refusal to accept limitations. They weren't the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but they kept showing up, kept trying, kept believing they could make a difference. And somehow, against all odds, they usually did. So what are you going to tell your sister, he asked, about humans and our madness? Vela's skin shifted to a contemplative blue. I am going to tell her the truth, that humans are dangerous, irrational, and completely insane, and that if you ever have the choice between fighting beside a human or without one, you choose with. Always.